This is Retrohammer, World Eater Traitor Legionnaire Detachment, circa 1988, Rogue Trader era Slaves to Darkness army list. Thank you for joining me for a look back at the history of a Warhammer 40,000 universe through the miniatures and books of the time. And in this episode of Retrohammer, we're going to take a look back at a very old force that I have from a Warhammer 40,000 game. It's the oldest force that I still have in anything like a functional unit. And it's very interesting to look at this moment in time. So it's the start of June at the moment in 2017. We are a few weeks away from a publication of Warhammer 40,000 8th edition. And an integral part to the 8th edition offering, in terms of what the lore and the setting is going to be around, are Chaos Marines of one type. In the case in point is a Death Guard, so Nurgle-esque Chaos Marines. However, the first Chaos Marines were actually Chaos Marines of Slaanesh and Khorne, and also of, in effect, an undivided Chaos power in the form of a Black Legion. And these came onto the scene in the Warhammer 40,000 universe with the publication of this book in the background, the first volume of Realm of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness. And Slaves to Darkness described for the first time in detail the events of the Horus Heresy and gave us the protagonists that resulted from that conflict in their 41st millennium incarnations. And that was in the form of the Traitor Legions, the descendants of the rebel chapters from the Horus Heresy. And then in addition to that, we also got the Imperium's response to those, the Grey Knights chapter and their supporting units as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this period through this remnant of my World Eaters Traitor Legionnaire force based on the Slaves to Darkness army list. All these miniatures date from around 1988, I believe, and these were the first Chaos Marines ever to be produced, and it was a really fascinating time in terms of the range it was presented, because the Chaos Marines came along in a very eclectic and diverse mix of models at the time, and very early in the game, in terms of the idea of the Chaos Marines and the Traitor Legions, Games Workshop invested an enormous amount of sculpting effort into producing a very diverse range of models, and arguably, and not accidentally I don't think, the Chaos Marine range was probably more individualistic and varied than the actual original Space Marine ranges were at the time. And this was to reflect their chaotic, diverse and corrupted nature. This came both in the form of Chaos Marines that were loyal to specific Chaos gods. So in the case here, we have the World Eaters of Khorne. We also have Slaanesh Traitors from the Emperor's Children. We had the Thousand Sons from Tzeentch, and finally the Death Guard from Nurgle. So there was and all of these were supported by extensive miniature ranges. And then there are a whole host of models within those ranges that were quite versatile, that could represent Chaos Marines of an undivided faction. And then in addition to that, all of the Chaos Marine models doubled up to serve as Chaos Renegade models for playing Chaos Renegade and Champion battles. That was also supported by an army list that was published in White Dwarf 107. As well as the corrupted Astartes followers of the Chaos Gods, we were also presented with Daemonic minions as well. And in my detachment, I did have a few of these as well, and we can see in the form of, there are 4 Bloodletters and also a Fleshhound of Khorne, which supported the Marines as well. I put this together probably around 1990, I think. That's as well as I remember it. It was originally a larger force. There was a second tactical squad, and then there was also an assault squad. But I sold those off. I can't remember for what reason. And I also had a Dreadnought, a Furibundus class Dreadnought from the original Bob Naismith sculpt. But I also sold that off for whatever reasons at the time. I don't recall now. Now, at the time of the Slaves to Darkness lists, Traitor Legionnaire squads were made up in their units of their Chaos numbers, and they were all adapted from the standard Space Marine or the standard Imperial army lists. So I had there's 2 8-man squads. There's a Devastator squad, which is a Sergeant, 4 heavy weapon Marines and 3 normal Marines. I've configured 1 Trooper as a standard bearer for each squad. And then a tactical squad, which had one Sergeant, one marine with a missile launcher and then 6 other marines. This guy here with the large back banner served as an officer, probably a captain or maybe a lieutenant for the force. This model here, which actually does bear, which we'll look at in a bit, is actually an Apothecarian. This Fleshhound is his Demonic companion. The 4 Bloodletters, well, that was a half-size squad. You actually get those in 8s. I don't know what happened to my other 4. I don't even know if I ever had a full 8, but yes, I think I did. But for some reason, I only ended up keeping 4. I have vague recollections that actually this was an army I might have painted. I might have cut the army down for a painting competition or something. But anyway, this is a bit that was left over. So it's really interesting to kind of like get this force out to show you guys and show you what the Chaos Marines originally looked like. The way I'll do this is we'll look at these models up close. I'll show you through them, and I'll talk a bit about each model as I go. So let's start with, well, in effect, the Detachment Commander. Now, this is just one of the many. Now, the way I painted these is I painted them in all black and then added red armour on as well. Weapon details and a few other bits. They were all right for the time. This guy was quite a peculiar one. He had this sort of skeletal half of his body as well as the armoured half. Quite peculiar. I was fairly dedicated at the time. I hand painted all the World Eater badges, and where I had shoulder pads I hand painted corn symbols on as well. So yes. And this model here is an example of what you would generally think to be one of the non-specific Chaos Marines. So this model could easily represent a Marine from any of the Chaos powers. And early on, you can see here early on they got into this idea of having sort of like corrupted models in this, as well as his skeletal bits. He has this chainsaws grafted onto his forearm. Now you may have noticed a large banner, and let's take a look at this. This is my own design, and my concept for this was to take the idea of the World Eater mouth eating a planet or devouring a planet. I expanded on that idea and I painted it as a visage of a Fleshhound of Khorne to, I suppose, in part replicate his demonic hand that accompanied the officer. And yes, the planet is being consumed against this background of stars in the maw of the Fleshhound, and as I tried to do throughout this force, I used white as a colour of the eyes of all creatures as Khornic demons. Certainly at the time of this book, at Slaves to Darkness, all Khornic demons had white within white eyes, very unnerving looking. At the time, my Latin skills were not great, and I think I only had a small pocketbook of Latin, so I very crudely I wanted to write blood for the blood god in Latin, and this doesn't mean blood for the blood god in Latin. The grammar is all wrong, but that was what it was supposed to mean. I could repaint it and change it, but I'm going to leave it as it is for giggles. But yeah, so I hand painted the logo as well, but it's supposed to mean blood for the blood god. Who knows? Maybe that is actually what this World Eater wrote on his banner, given the deranged state of his brain from all the psychosurgery he's been subjected to. While at the time they weren't called the butcher's nails, certainly in descriptive terms in Slaves to Darkness, it was intimated they did undergo psychosurgery to enhance their aggression. So yeah, so that is the Detachment officer. Let's have a look at his demonic companion, a hound. In this case, a Fleshhound. So a Fleshhound is, as I'm sure you're aware, the demonic hound of the Chaos Power of Khorne. These are the most peculiar beasts. I mean, they're very gangly hounds. They've got enormous chests and very pinched waists. But then spikes and protrusions along their backs. And if you get the focus on its ugly little face, it has I painted its distinctive white eyes of Khorne. They have this peculiar bat-like, these bony protrusions with this membrane structure between them. So the Fleshhound was a truly bizarre looking beast. And underneath all that, you may just be able to make out the collar of Khorne, which all these creatures wore. I don't know if the collar of Khorne still has any game influence it did at the time, but this gave the Fleshhound protection against magical attacks, as at the time, and this got retconned later, psychers and magicians were an aberration to Khorne, and you simply couldn't have them in your forces. You couldn't have a Khornate Psyker. All your killing had to be done with physical means. So yes, so that's this Flesh Hound. Let's have a look at the Apothecarian. This again is one of the general purpose Chaos Marine models. I don't think I quite painted this guy. I didn't do all the highlighting on his armour. I don't know for what reason or why. For some reason I painted all of the right hand side gauntlets in red. I must have read something in some fluff to say that World Eaters had that painted it that way. This guy's got some nice mutations. He's got 4 arms, and he's also got this mutated hand as well, which I at the time in my teenage enthusiasm picked out in a lurid green, and he has a chaos symbol on his shoulder. But still, I quite like the idea of having a little bit of the original Astartes feel to them, and I painted the stylized version of a Staff of Apollo onto his shoulder pad. Let's take a look at a couple of Bloodletters now. So the Bloodletter is the Lesser Demon of Khorne. These are the original models, the original Bloodletters that were done by Games Workshop. They're spindly, peculiar little models, and I guess they rather nicely reflected the peculiar demons they were supposed to be embodying. I seem to recall using chestnut ink and various colours to do this, and I wanted them to look somewhat distorted and unreal and somewhat fleshy, and yeah, I was quite pleased with the way they turned out. Again, got the white eyes of a Khornate demon. I'm not sure if it was deliberate, but Bloodletters certainly had a Giger-esque quality with their elongate heads. And now I don't know if that was deliberate homage to Giger's work or if it was a reference to something else. It certainly made you think that way. Of course, all the Bloodletters are armed with these Hellblades, which were at the time rather effective demonic swords, and I think that's carried through into the game today. This one's almost sort of bent over on itself, which really shows the peculiar. They had very weird, lithe, almost serpent-like bodies, peculiar arms, very strange creatures. And then the final Bloodletter. Does bring back memories looking at these guys. So there you have some Bloodletters. Shall I take a look at some Chaos Marines now? Before I start showing you the Marines, when I built this force, and you will be able to tell now because I think you can still see the variety of models I bought. I tried to have no repeated models in my force. Given that this is in effect about half of the infantry that I had, I think I managed to avoid any repeats in the miniature selection. Every model was different. I had to cheat a bit, and I'll show you a couple of the cheats I did. Actually, let's start straight away with a cheat. This is one of the cheats I did to get enough model variety. Now, you won't know it to look at it unless you bought these at the time, but this is actually a miniature that was designed as originally it was designed as a rider for a Chaos Steed, so a Juggernaut or a Mount of Slanesh. Then Games Workshop later on brought some lower legs out that allowed you to pose them as infantry, so I bought a few of these guys to give myself enough variety in the posing. Got the distinctive Chaos backpack. These are second generation Chaos backpacks. The original, these were quite nice. These were slimmed down compared to the original. The original ones were very fat and bulbous. These ones slimmed it down and they look much better. Again, the white eyes mimicking Khornate demon kind. A slightly different design for the squad banner. The number of Khorne in the top corner. A random skull here, I don't know why. A skull that was from the plastic Citadel skeleton box set. Anyone who remembers that, great piece of plastic miniature history. And here the entire banner was an outline of a symbol of Khorne, and then I painted again the idea of the planet trapped in the maw, which is a symbol of the World Eaters. Had a lot of fun with painting those banners. have a look at the squad sergeant from the tactical squad. At this time, there was a very different feel to Chaos Marines to how they are now. The Chaos Marines, apart from the fact that they were organised along the lines of their Chaos God number, they actually worked very much like Loyalist Marines, and they still use the same sort of weapon organisations. And as you can see here, the World Eaters had tactical squads, they had Devastator squads, even in the 41st Millennium edition. It was only later on that they were morphed into being the Cornate Berserkers that we know these days. Back in the day, every Traitor Legion was still presented as being a tactically functional force with assault, tactical and Devastator assets, and all the vehicles as well. So it was a very different image of the Traitor Legions, and probably in the modern 40k, something that maybe the Word Bearers, which are still a functioning organised legion, would possibly compare to. Whereas now the World Eaters and the Emperor's Children are depicted as being, in effect, roving warbands, loosely organised together, but highly specialised. Again, those two are models who were fairly versatile and could represent any chaos power. Here we have a Traitor Legionnaire who is very specific to Khorne, and this Traitor Legionnaire's helmet has been fashioned in the style of a Bloodletter. I can't remember how I painted these. I think I inked the weapons straight onto the metal at the time. I had a bit of a thing for that then. Lots of Giger-esque influences on this head here, I think, perhaps more so than the Bloodletters. These helmets had a very Giger look to them, very alien-esque. But there were nice details as well, like this guy had a bolt pistol sidearm. Then you had the distinctive missile launcher, which we all nicknamed the Shoehorn for obvious reasons. But these Chaos Marines had a tremendous amount of character to them, and that's what made collecting them so much fun. You have another guy. This guy has got a variant on the Bloodletter style head, and then he's got this tail with a razor saw on the end, which is quite amusing and novel. Yeah, definitely amusing and novel. There's a little World Eater symbol I painted. I did try to fit them on where I could. And this guy had a nice large shoulder pad, so I painted a Cornate badge on. I did all these by hand. It took me a long time to do them, as you can probably imagine, but I had a pretty steady hand for doing stuff like this. On my old Space Wolves Marines, which was my first army I ever collected, I did name plaques and painted all the names onto the troopers, which was quite good fun. It was fun in a way, but it added loads of character to them, and whenever like one of you guys got blown away, it was like, oh no, Brother Rittman's got taken out, or oh no, Garibaldi's got taken down. But then in the same way you knew who survived. Here's another one of the rider mount models. Giger-esque looking again. This guy's got a monocular eye and these horns. At the time, these were generally available through Games Workshop. I seem to remember I mail ordered a lot of these guys just to get the variety of poses. What was difficult to get at the time were the Tzeentchian Marines and the Nurgle Marines. They were really hard to get hold of, and there's some beautiful classic models. Unfortunately, I sold most of mine. I managed to collect most of the Tzeentch and the Nurgle Marines in the end. Fortunately, I ended up selling them, as I did quite a lot of my models of this era. But I've still kept one. I've kept my favourite Nurgle Renegade, a model for those of you around at a time called Toadface. And possibly one day, maybe once we've got 8th edition, I might do a little comparison of Nurgle Marines then and now. Here's another guy. I really like this model. This was one of my favourites. Really, he's very Giger-esque indeed, this one. He's got the alien style head, the Bloodletter head, and then these big prongs sticking out of his shoulder pads. All sorts of different sculptors worked on these models from Games Workshop at the time. I can't remember actually who it was. I don't know if Ali Morrison was one of them, Ali and Trish Morrison. But yeah, there were a lot of people who did them, and yeah, such an eclectic mix of models. Yeah, very good. Oh, there you go, I like that. He had a combat accessory on his bolt gun as well. So there are all sorts of little individual touches to them. There were some models which were kind of, the same base was used to do two different figures. So if we look at these two guys, the same torso, the same basic torso was used, and then as you can see, they just remodeled the heads. Made a better job of the corn symbol on him. Let's move to the Devastator squad. So we'll start with the Sergeant. This is another generic Marine. This guy would represent any faction, or possibly he was actually a little bit Slaneshi, although I think he fit Khorne just fine, but with this studded forearm, could be a little bit Slaneshi influenced perhaps. Again, very Giger-esque. The helmet of this guy really reminded me of the Engineer's helmet from the original Alien film. The unfortunate occupant of the alien derelict that they found on LV-426 when they pick up an alien. However, the helmet here, you could almost imagine similarities with the Indomitus pattern Terminator Marine as well. So an intriguing mix and blend of styles there. Don't know why I had a hole in each shoulder pad. Maybe it's supposed to have been shot through or something. Let's have a look at the second standard bearer. Exactly the same standard painted again. Yeah, I spent a long time hand painting these World Eater badges and coordinate symbols. Let's move on to the heavy weapon troopers in the Devastator squad. So another shoehorn missile launcher. You could get the full variety of heavy weapons for these guys. As well as missile launchers, you had heavy bolters, heavy plasma guns, las cannons, conversion beamers. Yeah, there was a whole lot available. Somewhat skull-like mask. So look at this guy. This guy's almost a bit of a chaos warrior in space. I guess he's kind of grew out of the same sort of design style as the Chaos Warriors that came around the same time and actually preceded these a bit. These guys were certainly heavily influenced by the Chaos Warrior models of the time, and Chaos Marauders as well. It's also interesting to think that with the way the rules worked in Slaves to Darkness on Chaos attributes and Chaos rewards, you could actually get rewards and attributes that would give Chaos Marauders and Chaos Warriors in fancy battle technological weapons. So things like this heavy bolt gun. So these Chaos Marine models could also be used in fancy battle to represent technologically equipped warriors, which gave them an interesting utility. So yes, heavy bolter Marine. The third heavy weapon trooper. This time, if you don't know what this weapon is, and you may not, and it's not a heavy plasma gun, those people who weren't around at the time, this is actually the original conversion beamer model. And this is a weapon that looks very different in the modern iteration, which was actually visualised really by Forgeworld, and it's got a very retro 1950s sci-fi gun look to it, whereas this was something different again, much more industrial looking. I think the new look was good because it made it more distinct. This and the heavy plasma gun always looked fairly similar, but yeah, I still loved both of them. They were both nice models. Yeah, so this guy's got he's literally got a skull face. And the final heavy weapon trooper. So again, armed with a heavy bolt gun. Nice badge of Khorne there. And World Eater Legion badge. His bolt pistol sidearm, yeah. I even painted some targeting diodes. And moving on to last two tactical marines. These are both really nice models. He's lost a bit of covering off his base. Very old style green bases. If you look at the art in Slaves to Darkness, it was the rage at the time basing these guys on green, but it actually worked really well on a visual level because the green, firstly it's a light base on a dark model. Green is a strong contrast colour to the red, so it really makes the red jump out at you as well. And when I painted these, I didn't want to do them all red. I think part of it was laziness because it was easier to paint black, but it also made the red really stand out and it made them look more evil in general. I used to play a lot of games with this force against a mate of mine who had a really nicely painted Blood Angels force, so it was all like Mark 7 Blood Angels. It was a lovely looking unit, and our battles used to look great with the Blood Angels in red fighting against World Eaters in the black and the red. Yeah, those were fantastic looking battles. I remember those very fondly. So yeah, this is another type of head, something different again. A nice big badge of corn, a nice large World Eater symbol. And then the final model. This one is one of my favourite Chaos Legionnaire models. It's only got one shoulder pan. It's kind of like got this almost like chainmail shoulder. And again, the helmet is really Giga-esque, really Giga-esque. And I've no doubt whatsoever that whoever sculpted these had watched it was clearly a fan of Alien and had probably read some of H.R. Giger's work, like Necronomicon and other, as you might call them. Well, I don't know if you'd ever have Giger's books as coffee table books, but some of them were that sort. But yeah. So that was kind of like the force, and these are all models that were released and available at the same point in time. When I collected these, I did add a couple more models later on of more recent vintage, but only like a little bit more recent vintage. And these were just to expand the character selection. So the first one was this guy. This was a Chaos Terminator Marine. These guys came along after the Metal Terminators got released and they then did a Chaos edition. So yeah, so I added him in. Same sort of scheme. Armorless wise, I had no idea where he used to fit in. I just added him, so I liked him. And then the final model was the first of a newer generation of Cornate Marines, and it's this Cornate champion here. And he's armed with this enormous, perhaps power axe, or maybe even a demonic weapon. And this model came along, I don't know if it was a year or two after these guys. You can see the style here has shifted noticeably. And this guy, while he was, at the time, I think there was maybe two released, if I remember. I think there was a companion model, also a Cornate, a World Eater Marine. But these, the styling of this guy is not entirely dissimilar to modern Cornate Berserker models for 40k. And it was probably this model and its companion model that were the origins, the modern look of the World Eaters in 40k. Yeah, I just added him in effect as a higher ranking officer. So all of these models and the structure of this army was very early in the history of Warhammer 40,000. Realm of Chaos came in 1988. It was, just around a year after 40k got released. It was a very narrow window in time that the Traitor Legions were represented in this respect for 40k play. Very soon got turned into more, I don't know if I should say, caricaturish views of themselves. Games Workshop took the creative decision of making the World Eaters really focused on melee as berserkers. The Emperor's Children became the Noise Marines. The Thousand Sons became Rubric Marines. And then the Death Guard became the Plague Marines. And they all became kind of like specialised parts of a wider Chaos army. At the time of this force, this Cornate force, you really couldn't field them alongside other forces of opposing Chaos powers. So you absolutely could not put a World Eater force alongside an Emperor's Children force of Slaanesh, because the antipathy and hatred between those two Chaos powers was such at the time of Slaves to Darkness they just wouldn't cooperate, and they were in effect in a state of war with each other. That was very much how the Traitor Legions got presented at this time, that they were as much at war with each other in their own interscene battles dictated by their Chaos God allegiance as they were at war with the Imperium of man. So yeah, a familiar concept in the Chaos Marines, and this is the original Chaos Marine concept we're looking at here. A very familiar concept to the modern day 40k player. However, the whole execution of this was completely different to what you will see in a 40k force these days. Of course, when the Horus Heresy came along in 2012 with Book 1 Betrayal, we saw an army list and a force structure that I thought paid a lot of homage to the Realm of Chaos Slaves to Darkness book in particular, and very specifically to Slaves to Darkness, because by the time The Lost and the Damned came along, already the specialisation was beginning to creep into the Chaos Marine lists, and the Death Guard and the Thousand Sons were beginning to lose their structure as a complete Marine Legion, and were starting to become identity focused as the specialists I talked about earlier. For me, this is a very interesting bit of a 40k history, and to think about it from the point of view of a Retrohammer perspective, because Chaos Marines have never been presented this way again, really, I think. Because here we had Chaos Marines presented as being, in effect, continuations of the Marine Legions they originally were, but just they had adapted to their chaotic allegiance a bit. It's very different now. But the Horus Heresy, I think, drew a lot on this period of the Slaves to Darkness traitor lists, and for me that is one of the things that really draws me and attracts me to the Horus Heresy, is the roots in the early 40k. And to return to where I started with this video when I was mentioning about the release of 8th edition, I have a feeling that we may well see the reappearance of some army lists that are a bit of this age. And I think that will be quite an exciting and fun development. And it would be nice to see Chaos Marines become a bit more tactical again, and not so linear and specialised according to their chaos power. But we will see. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of this. Really is a bit of Warhammer 40,000 history in this force. These really are from that era, very original Chaos Marines. Yeah, they survived the test of time. These guys have been all over the place. Lots of house moves. They've been loaned, returned, loaned again, but they've made it. And yeah, here we are, nearly 30 years on, looking at them to reflect back on the origins of the Traitor Legions in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. That was Retrohammer. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.